Hello everybody and welcome back. In this lecture we're going to have a look at the shader editor. Now this may look familiar. If you have a look over at the materials tab, this is exactly the same as what we've been playing with before. However, this time round we're going to have far more control over what is actually going on. As you can see, there are all these dots on the side. There aren't those here, there's just a series of values. So what does that mean? Well, let's go find out more. Hello everybody and welcome. So in this lecture we're going to play with the shader editor. Now the shader editor is very similar to our materials properties that we've had before. So let's go and explore that first and then we'll start setting it up and playing with it as well. So I'm going to switch over into object mode and select one of my objects that has a material applied to it. Now at the very top we've got a series of predefined layouts and one of them is shading. If we click on that, it will take us to a pre-set up shader setup, and this is really useful. However, I struggle with screen space when it comes to this, and it doesn't have my little area down in the bottom here to show you keystrokes all the time. But we'll have a quick overview, then we'll sort out this workspace, and then we'll play with the nodes themselves. So in front of us here, we've got some windows. We've got our 3D editor window, so we can see what's really going on when we change our materials around. We've got this image editor on the left-hand side and a file explorer as well. Now I want to alter this setup so it's suitable for me, but I don't want to have it overwrite what we've currently got at the top. So I'm going to right click on the shading tab and duplicate it. I'm going to double click at the top there and rename it. I'm going to call it shading smaller for the moment because I'm going to make a smaller workspace for me to handle. And then I'm going to go ahead down to one of the corners of these windows and start making the area smaller. I don't want the file explorer. I don't want the UV editor at the moment. And also, these are really the wrong way around. Our particular model that we're working on is very vertical. So let's play with our workspace a little further. I'm going to make the shader editor disappear completely and then drag in from the side. And here we go. Our lamp is a vertical object. That's about right. It fills up a good portion of my screen. And this area here that's currently got the lamp in it, what we can do there is go up to the editor type and switch it to the shader editor. And here we go, we're back there. Now I want a bit more space. I'm not going to play with the properties panel for the moment. So I'll press the N key and make that disappear and zoom in a little more. Brilliant, that's a much better workspace to work with. And don't be afraid of doing this yourself. Being able to make the workspace comfortable for you is very important. There is one final thing I need to do. One of the things that I want to do here is make this area on the side suitable for keystrokes. So I'm just going to come in, change the editor type to text editor and hide the header. Okay, perfect. So that's how I need it set up for me. Of course, you don't need a little text editor in the bottom, but that's the important thing, being able to manipulate your environment to work for you. Let's have a look at the materials properties as we have been playing with them. You'll see here that many things match one another. At the top here, we've got a little checkbox. I want to draw your eye to it because if for some reason use nodes doesn't have a tick in it, you won't be able to actually see anything happen. We are going to use nodes to control our material. You'll notice the next thing along is slot 1. In our material at the moment, we only have one material defined, so there is only one slot occupied, and we have lamp paint, which is the name here. If we go at the top here, we can put lamp and paint together and you can see it updates. And if we update it over here, of course, it updates back over there as well. And we can see there are two users, and that we can see down here as well. There are two users, the lamp shade and the lamp base of this material, which is great. It means if we change one of the properties of this material, it affects everything that that material is applied to. Now let's have a look at the nodes themselves. So we have this big one here, the principled BSDF. This is a node that's a shader node. There are a few other shader nodes you may want to pick, and it's not always cut and dry which one you might want to use. Since the principled BSDF shader has come out, it's been incredibly useful. It's enabled us to make physically accurate materials. However, sometimes that's not actually what we want. So it's important to realize that you can use other nodes as well. And in some cases, notice down at the bottom here, we've got emission. That means it's going to emit something. So this is very useful for our light bulb. As we'll see in a future lecture coming up, this is not very controllable. So it's better to use an emission node. So let's have a look at nodes themselves. We can move these around. At the moment, they're both selected. So I'm going to press the A key twice to deselect, and then we can place these where we want. And later on, it will become apparent as our materials get more complex that organizing these and making sure they're laid out in a useful manner is very important. Otherwise, it's very much like coding. You'll end up with a big spaghetti mess. And often these things are joked about being spaghetti because you end up with lines like this one going between these two green sockets absolutely everywhere. So staying organized is really, really important. Well, let's zoom in here and have a look at what's going on. So we've got an output here that's green, and we've got an input that's also green. We can drag that out and notice that our material goes black, and that's because nothing's controlling the surface properties of this material anymore. If I plug that back in, it'll go red again because that's what we've got this set up to do. In general, you will want to link together green sockets, purple sockets together, grey sockets and yellow sockets. That's not always the rule, but it's a good one to start with. Occasionally you will end up plugging grey sockets into yellow sockets or yellow sockets into grey sockets, but in general the colours will match. So let's go ahead and play with this a little and see why do we want to do this? We've got a simple material anyway. Well, it's about control. At the moment, in order to change the base color, we have to click into here and start changing it. So if we wanted it green or blue, we could do that. However, if we wanted a bit more control or wanted to apply a texture to it later on so that something else is controlling the color, we will have to add something further to the left in order to plug into this yellow socket. And this yellow socket dictates a color. It's 3 values, red, green, and blue. And if you've got an image or something like that with an alpha texture, you would have to separate that out separately. So this has 3 values coming into it, red, green, and blue. The grey one underneath is literally just a value between 0 and 1 is often the case. So let's go ahead and plug something into the base color. Let's go and add another node. So we can go to the add menu at the top, or just like on the 3D editor, we can go Shift and A. That will also work. And we can add in what's called an RGB node. And we can see as we go down here, we've got lots of different options. We've got different shader types, like this green one here. And in the challenge coming up, I'm going to tell you to explore that and see what you come up with. We've got texture, we've got color. Does that sound right? Well, it's close. It's got something called mix RGB in it, where you would mix colors together. So what do we need here? Well, RGB is a type of input. So we can go ahead and pop that in. And it's an input because look, it takes nothing on the left hand side. All of the sockets that are on the left hand side are inputs. All of the ones on the right hand side are outputs. This one doesn't have anything on the left hand side, so it's just outputting. So it's a type of node that's a raw bit of information. And if we grab by left clicking the yellow socket and plug it into the base color, you'll notice that now we've got a very quick and easy way of exploring colors for our lamp. Now let's do a test here of plugging something else in. Now say we wanted to keep the principle just there but try something else. How can we do that? Well, if we click on this little drop down, it makes the principle BSDF much smaller. That's great. Now let's go ahead and add in a different node type. So Shift and A to add. And I'm going to go down to shader, and this time I'm going to add in just a diffuse BSDF. So it's a much more simple node, as you can see here. Now let's plug the color in here and the output to the surface output. And now it's diffused, so it's got no reflection at all. We can change the roughness here, but that's not going to make that much difference to something that's already diffuse, which means that as the light hits it, it gets scattered. So there's not going to be many, or if any, reflections on the surface. And if we make the roughness 100%, this is definitely not going to have any shiny reflections. Now that's not the type of material that we are going for, so perhaps if we delete that and add in a glossy BSDF. Now that sounds more like it. Go ahead, plug the yellow into the yellow, the green into the surface output. Hey, look at that. That's got a nice sheen to it. It looks completely different from what we've been playing with so far. And of course we can adjust the roughness here and change how it looks. This gives us a completely different aesthetic. It looks completely different. In fact, it reminds me on the inside here as I'm moving around, much like some of the Christmas decorations I've I've got for some reason. Anyway, as you can see here, there are lots of different options in order to create your material, and we're really at the tip of a very, very big and powerful iceberg. But we're not going to delve in too much detail right at this moment in time, and it's time for your challenge. Okay, your challenge is to play with the materials in the node editor. This is really to just get you familiar with what's going on there. We're going to be playing with it a little more in the next lecture and adding a bit more interest to our lamp, but otherwise it's just a playground for you. And what I'd like you to do is create at least 2 different materials. Now remember that you can take your material and still store it there so that it's still applied to your model. That's absolutely fine. But what I'd like you to do is just explore and create 2 different materials. Try some of the other options there and see what you come up with. Remember that some of these nodes are more complex than others. So for instance, if you picked the glass shader, you would end up creating a wonderful glass type object, but it will take a lot more rendering time than a simple diffuse shader. So go ahead, create 2 different materials and experiment with those different shader nodes as well. Now remember, you can have a material on the backdrop too, and the little stage or the platform that we've got that we're going to have the lamp jumped onto. That's entirely up to you how you decide to lay out your scene, and assign those new materials to the rest of your lamp. If you haven't done that yet, you may have just been following along and just have the material on the base and haven't added any other materials yet. This is a prime opportunity to do that. So pause the video and give that a go. Okay everybody, welcome back. Let's go ahead now and add 2 different materials to our model using the node editor. Okay everybody, welcome back. The materials I want to focus on here are not the lampshade. I'm quite happy with what we had there before, so I'm going to revert my file back to where it was previously, which is very useful, and I'm going to go and create my new shading workspace. It's not going to take me too long to do that. There we go. So we're back with the lamp paint here. I am going to add in an RGB node. There is this search function at the top. I highly encourage, once you know the name of the thing you're looking for, searching for it is going to be a lot quicker. And of course, later on, you can start storing what you've made, and that's going to make finding it much, much quicker. Again, you can actually store materials that you've made in a default blend file, and that's incredibly useful if they're materials that you find yourself making or using a lot of the time. In fact, a lot of the material packs that you can buy online simply are someone who's done that. They've packaged everything together and pre-made them and just stored them in a file that you can apply at any point. And you can do that yourself as well. But I'm digressing. I've got this set up again. That red isn't quite right. I think I'm going to have to play with it. There we go. It's a bit more orange. There we go. So that's looking good there. But the ones I really want to look at are the stem itself. So at the moment, we've got this kind of setup here, and I don't think the stem is perhaps dark enough, or whether I want it this raw metal colour. I am going to hide my armature, though. It really is blocking the rest of the model. So let's have a look at some other options that we can do. So I'm going to go ahead and input an RGB node so I can change things around. I'm going to get rid of the principled BSDF for the moment and just try some of the other options that we've got here. So I'm going to go to shader. Now, it must be a shader at this point. If you have played around with some of the other options, you will notice that they just don't work. This output node, or rather this input node, will only accept a shader output node. It just won't work otherwise. So let's go back to shader. There are lots of things to pick from. Now, anisotropic is something that looks really cool on things that are metallic, so I'm going to try that here, especially things like saucepans. I don't know what it's going to look like at this point in time. It might look really cool. In fact, it's already starting to look a bit brighter, which is kind of what I wanted it to look like in the first place. And if I make it less rough, so it's a bit more reflective, it's starting to look actually really nice. I'm liking how this is turning out. And let's just try twisting this around slightly. I don't think that's going to make too much difference to how our current model is looking though. So again, playing with these figures and seeing what you end up creating with them. Obviously 100% shininess there is not going to work. It's more chrome. So yes, playing with all of these settings and just seeing what you come up with is a great way of exploring such a powerful setup without really worrying about what you're doing. I know that sounds a bit haphazard, but seriously, you can come up with something that you wouldn't have done if you were just being methodical about it. This really is a playground for materials. I'm liking how that's come out. So I'm going to leave that like that. But before I do anything else, we are looking at this in Look Dev mode. It's very important that we check it occasionally in rendered mode as well to make sure that what we think it looks like is what it actually looks like. And our scene, we've turned off the lamps that are there, so I'm going to turn on the lights that are in the scene itself and turn on the backdrop as well. Now you can see it's actually a much darker material than it made it look in the first place, but I'm still quite happy with the shading and how it's looking here, how it's playing with the reflections. Now I can start changing these up, and I do think I want a slightly higher roughness. And then remember, you can press Ctrl and B, draw a render border. That will certainly speed things up. And what you can also do at that point is go to your render properties and come down to your sampling rate, and on your viewport turn that up much higher. So if I set this to 64, I'm going to get a much higher quality render, or even higher. It does depend on the strength of your computer. So if I went to 256 and I tried that on my old laptop, I'd be waiting a while. But because I've got this small area, we can see in detail what's going on, and I'm really liking the effect that the anisotropic shader here is giving us in rendered mode. I'm going to come out of that now with Control Alt and B, and we see that the actual rendering itself is taking a significant amount of time longer. So I'm going to knock the viewport back down to 32. That's for my system. You'll probably have different settings yourself. Okay, so that's one material done. This backdrop, I'm not liking it being super shiny. It's great for showing off reflections and things like that, but I think it needs a bit of a lighter environment, perhaps a different color than gray as well. So I'm going to bring the color up. I'm going to lower the amount of reflections by increasing the roughness again, so it's a bit more of a matte floor. And the base color, yeah, I'm going to take that out as well. Search for an RGB node. It's right at the top. We can plug that in. Now we might want this to look more orange to make it look a warm environment, or because it's a lamp, we might want it to be a colder environment, perhaps a blue, a darker blue. Now at this point, of course, we might want to expand our windows and just have a look at the scene overall. Yeah, I'm liking the new color that we've got there. So I'm liking the lampshade itself. I'm liking the new material that we've applied to this part of our model, the stem, the arm, the bit that's moving around. I think that's really important because that needs to be distinct from the rest of the model. It's a nice simple setup here. And of course the background itself. The only thing we've not got is the bit that we're jumping on. Now, do I have that there? Yes, I've called it a bench. So we've got this object that we're jumping on. And I think it should have its own material. I don't think it does at the moment. So I'm a bit cramped with my window, so let's move this back again. Yes, currently it's set to reflection. In fact, the floor is also reflection. So let's call this backdrop and be explicit about that. I think I'm misnaming something else earlier on, but never mind. I'm going to remove the material from this model entirely. And I'm going to click New. Notice we're not going into the material properties on the left-hand side anymore. And once we've done that, you know what I haven't done? I do apologize. I haven't got a little area down here for my keystrokes. So hopefully if you have been relying on them, it hasn't covered up too many. There we go. So now we're in this area. We've got this object here. I think I'm going to leave it as a lighter sort of yellowy orange color, something like that, as it's a focal point of the scene. It's something we're going to try and get our lamp jumping on. But I'm not going to add anything else to it other than perhaps an RGB node so we can control the color a bit more explicitly. And what we can do here is I want the exact color we currently have here. I'm going to click on the preview box at the bottom, which is going to bring up the same options as we have here. And once I've done that, I can click the little eyedropper icon and come over that existing color. There we go. And then plug it in. So we're starting off where we want to. Okay, brilliant. How are you guys getting on? How are your scenes coming along as well now that they are starting to get coloured in and have materials on them? Things start looking much, much better. Do remember that at this point, if you're in Look Dev mode, as I am at the moment, let's make this full screen, then you're going to have something that looks a lot brighter than if you were in rendered mode. So it is important to hop in and out of both and make sure what you think you're getting is what you think you're getting. Yeah. And make sure what you think you're going to get is actually what's happening in the background. And that's going to become especially important in a couple of lectures' time, because we're not going to be able to properly preview what's going on here in terms of what the materials and the lighting is going to be doing. So we're going to have to hop into cycles quite a bit to make sure that things are behaving themselves. So that's it for this lecture. Please share how you're getting on so far. I'd love to see what type of materials you've decided to settle on for your model. And remember, you don't have to settle on them. You can always go back later and tweak them to your heart's content. Share your work over in the discussions, and I'll see you all in the next lecture.